mountain breathed like a beast in the dark. Mist rolling over moss-covered trees, branches twitching under unseen weight. British redcoats moved in single file, rifles clutched tight, their boots muffled in the wet jungle floor of the Blue Mountains. They thought they were hunting men, runaways with sticks and stones, easy to crush, easy to kill. They didn't know it yet, but they were the ones being hunted. The Maroons did not just hide in the forest, they became it. Leaves hung to their skin, roots muffled their steps, thunder rolled without rain. This wasn't guerrilla warfare, it was a reckoning. A Boer war had begun, and the land itself was on their side. Then a horn sounded. The forest erupted. Figures dropped from trees, spears flew from the ferns. The redcoats turned, too slow as shadows with bare feet and painted faces crashed into their line. Blades tore through the wool, muskets misfired in the chaos. Men screamed, vanished and bled into the roots. One officer gave a command, then was cut down mid-sentence. Another tried to flee down a ravine, only to find himself staring up at the cold eyes of a hardened boy no older than 15, machete raised. There was no retreat, no surrender, only the sounds of war in the thick Jamaican dusk. The roars of defiant warriors, the clash of steel, the crack of musket fire swallowed by trees. And above them, moving not behind but through the fray, was a woman cloaked in indigo. Her blade already quenched, her eyes burning with thirst, her face streaked in charcoal and ash. She didn't follow the charge, she led it, yearning not just to kill but to carve a path toward freedom. Her name was Queen Nanny, a priestess, a general. Legend says she fought with the strength of the dead. She was not alone. Across the sugar fields of Haiti, in the rice swamps of Carolina, the jungles of Brazil and the highlands of Suriname, enslaved men and women rose in defiance. Some rebelled in the open, some fought with fire. Others fought in silence. But they all fought. This is the story of how the children of Africa fought back. How they resisted, rebelled, and set the world on fire in the name of something no empire could ever fully contain: freedom. In this episode, we uncover the many faces of resistance, both quiet and thunderous. We begin with the everyday defiance of the enslaved. The broken tools, the feigned illness, the whispered songs in forbidden tongues. We move into the fire and fury. The revolts that shook the empires from the swamps of South Carolina to the storm-tossed plantations of Saint-Domingue. We'll follow the leaders who rose from bondage, men and women who became generals, prophets and revolutionaries. And we'll trace how these waves of rebellion helped birth a global movement for abolition. This is not a story of passive suffering. It is a story of war. A war for dignity, a war for legacy, a war for liberation. Everyday resistance, the war of survival. Not all resistance screamed like that of the Maroons to the Jamaican mountains. Some whispered. In the fields, in the kitchens, beneath the eye of the whip, there were rebellions too small to see, but too powerful to kill. A man might limp through the sugarcane, clutching his chest, feigning illness to spare his strength. A woman might let her tools slip again and again. The blade dull, the harvest slowed. Another might forget an order, spill the crop, work just slow enough to break the rhythm. These were not mistakes, they were strategies. Wounds dealt to the machine, one subtle strike at a time. But resistance wasn't just about work, it was about memory. In the dark, they whispered names that had crossed the Atlantic in chains. Names never recorded in ledgers, only passed from mouth to mouth. They gave their children names stolen from them, names of rivers, of ancestors, of gods. They taught their children where they came from, even if they couldn't point to it on a map. At night, they sang, spirituals with hidden meanings, coded messages and whispered warnings. Songs like Wade in the Water weren't just music. They were maps, survival plans, signs of when to run. They gathered in secret to tell stories. Some were tales of tricksters and heroes. Others were oral histories, memories smuggled out of Africa and reshaped under new stars. Many of these stories are still told today in villages and towns across the Caribbean. In those same nights, children learned the old ways. Not just words, but languages built in defiance. Creole, Patois, Gula, Saramacan, languages born of captivity but rooted in survival, fusing African tongues with the languages of empire and hiding truths inside every syllable. And when they bowed in church, not all were praying to the master's God. Some were calling on spirits older than empire, on Orisha, on Obia, on Lao, on ancestors who still walked beside them in dream and ritual. Those spiritual teachings carried in the bones of the enslaved still live today in Obia, Vodou, Santeria and beyond. For some, resistance lived inside the body. Women used herbs, roots and whispers passed down through generations to end pregnancies forced upon them. Not out of despair, but defiance. If they couldn't be free, they would deny the system one more soul to enslave. This was the war beneath the war, fought not with fire but with memory, with will and with everything they refused to surrender. Open rebellion, when the fire broke loose. There comes a moment when the whispered resistance is no longer enough. In the early light of a South Carolina morning in 1739, that moment arrived. A group of enslaved men gathered near the banks of the Stono River. They broke into a storehouse, seized muskets and powder, and killed the shopkeepers without hesitation. They marched south, drums beating, weapons raised, calling out a single word: liberty. They burned plantations, recruited others as they moved, and cut down anyone who stood in their path. Their destination was Spanish Florida, where freedom had been promised to any enslaved person who could escape the British. Dozens of them would die that day, heads placed on spikes, bodies left as warnings, but the message echoed far beyond the blood-soaked fields. Slavery would be fought with fire. It was not the first rebellion, and it would not be the last. In 1741, rebellion came not in the heat, but in the cold. Snow blanketed the streets of New York City. Fires burned across the city. First, Fort George, then warehouses, then homes. The sky glowed red against the white drifts. Colonial leaders panicked. Whispers of conspiracy turned to mass arrests. Dozens of enslaved black men accused of planning an uprising were tortured into confession. 13 were burned at the stake, public executions held in the snow. Others were hanged in chains that froze against their skin. Whether it was a planned revolt or hysteria, the message was the same. The enslaved were never truly silent, not even in the dead of winter. In 1800, Gabriel Prosser, a blacksmith in Virginia, planned to storm the armory and hold the governor hostage. He was betrayed before the first strike, but his vision shook the South. A rebellion guided by the same ideals that had built the United States. Liberty, revolution, justice. In Barbados, 1816, Boussa's rebellion ignited after rumours of emancipation turned to betrayal. The fires lit across the island could be seen from miles away. The response was brutal, but the spark could not be contained. In Jamaica, 1831, Samuel Sharp led the Baptist War. Tens of thousands rising up not just with blades and torches, but with sermons, scripture, and the unwavering belief that slavery was a sin against heaven itself. But nowhere did rebellion burn brighter than in Saint Domingue. The Haitian Revolution began in 1791. It did not end until the empire had been thrown off. Sugar fields turned into battlefields. Enslaved men became generals. and the colony became the first free black republic in the world. The names Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines lived on in history, not because they resisted slavery, but because they crushed it. Even at sea there was rebellion. On the Amistad, on the Mirmin, enslaved Africans fought captors, took the ships and demanded their freedom. Oceans did not dull their fury. Chains could not drown their will. These were not random outbreaks of violence. These were planned, disciplined, tactical wars. They fought with fire, yes, but also with drums, cymbals, maps, prayers, and prophecy. And the consequences were merciless. Bodies left hanging from trees, laws forbidding reading, gathering, drumming. Slave codes tightened, repression deepened, but so did the fear, because every revolt made it clear. Slavery was never stable. It was war, and every enslaved man, woman, and child was a soldier waiting for the right moment. And though many uprisings were crushed, they shattered illusions. They forced the world to see the enslaved not as property, but as revolutionaries. Their fire lit the path for abolitionists, for preachers, for writers, and for freedom movements still to come. This was not rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was revolution, meant to end a system built on suffering, and to prove, once and for all, that no people would remain in chains forever. Conclusion. For centuries they tried to erase the fire, to chain it, to bury it beneath sugar and soil and silence. But it burned anyway. From whispered prayers to open war, the children of Africa did not go quietly. They resisted, they endured, and they fought until the empires trembled. This was not just a story of slavery. It was a story of rebellion, of culture, of survival. A story of human beings who, even in bondage, never stopped being free in spirit. This project has been over a year in the making, a labour of remembrance, a reckoning with history, and with this episode, we conclude the Transatlantic Slave Trade series. But the echoes will remain, in the songs still sung, in the names still spoken, in the fight that never truly ended.